Yeah, you know what I'm now you use it turn it off.
All right, guys, we're going to get started. Yeah. Let me grab something to drink first. I'm going to pass this sign-in sheet around. If you don't mind getting us your name, email, that kind of stuff, we try to keep in contact with people. If you're not comfortable with that, that's fine too. All right, so I've been getting a bunch of feedback. I've been getting a bunch of seeking information from people, and some of the ideas would be like, do I talk too much about what addiction is? Because every week I go through kind of the science behind it, right? I go through like, here's what happens in the brain, here's what the criteria is. So I'm asking this group, do I need to do that tonight? Should I do that tonight? Or should I jump into other stuff? Should I go through a little bit of the basics? Tell me. Raise your hand if you want the basics.
Yes. I think you have to if there's new people.
Okay. But did you notice how client-centered I am? How participant-centered I am? It's really all about you. And you guys, you can't, on Facebook land, you can't see, but nearly everybody raised their hand. So, let's go through, we'll go through some of the basics. Then what we'll do is we'll kind of stop and we'll sort of reset and talk through what other topics you might want to talk about, or questions or burning desires you might have. I really want to get back to this idea of emphasizing if you have something going on that you feel like you need an answer for, this is an appropriate place to talk about it. Even if I don't have a presentation on it, we can talk through that. Just because the format is with me standing up here talking to you guys, it doesn't mean we can't just get into some questions and answers too. So we'll be a little bit less formal as we go through. We will also be actively exploring different ways to go about this group. Should we be splitting the group up and doing smaller groups and getting people a chance to really dig into issues? Should we do this one week and do that another week? My schedule is also such that my presence won't be here nearly as much as it was, just because of organizational needs and issues that I've been brought into at the state level, at the national level, that kind of stuff. So we're very open to feedback. We actually have the last Wednesday of the month, which I think is, if anybody has their phone in front of them, I think it's August 28th. At 5:30, we'll be doing a focus group that we would ask you all to come to if you could. And I'm going to get a sign-up sheet for that in the next couple weeks. And
What time?
It's at 5:30. Where you can share with the facilitator if you have any ideas on things we should be doing. The thing here is that there is no perfect way to do a family recovery program. Quite frankly, nobody knows exactly how to get this done. A lot of the stuff that we have going at FAVOR Greenville, we've invented. But everything we have going at FAVOR Greenville has been because you guys have asked for it. Does that make sense? Or you've suggested it. So we're going to do that again as we go through. All right, so let's just go through some basics. And it is important stuff, and it is good to like talk through this. Let me see if this one has the criteria in it before I pull it up, because I couldn't find the criteria today for some weird reason. Yes. Yes. Yeah, I will not be facilitating the focus group.
Oh, okay.
So the focus group will be facilitated. We're hiring somebody. We're asking somebody to do that for us. Okay? So you guys can say bad things. Because if I was in a room, you wouldn't be able to say bad things. So we're going to put you in a room with somebody who's a neutral third party so you can say bad things. Get it?
Yeah.
All right. Did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I had a comment, really. I've been coming to Favor for almost a year now. Has everybody seen this brochure? Okay, it's up in the front desk. It was the first time I'd seen it in a couple of weeks when I picked it up. And I wanted to compliment you personally, because in here it talks about your presentation to Congress and the recognition that FAVOR Greenville has gotten, which I was unaware of, honestly. And if you haven't seen this, it says Rich Jones, FAVOR Greenville's CEO, presented the FAVOR model as an outstanding program to Congress and the U.S. Surgeon General. That was in February of 2018. And then FAVOR Greenville was recognized by the Department of Health and Human Services and the Department of Justice as a top model program in the nation. And
I haven't talked about that in here. I mean, I can't imagine I haven't said that. Yes,
I was shocked when
Yeah.
I read it, and I want to just compliment you, number one, for your humility, but also for how you helped me personally and our humility.
Thank you. Yeah, it's cool. No, thank you.
He was begging for money as well.
No. We haven't talked about it for a while, but we have talked about that in here before, and we did. So, yeah, we've been recognized 2 different times by federal agencies as top organizations. So SAMHSA is the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration. They're the treatment arm, and then the Department of Justice, obviously, the criminal justice world has this year recognized us in that capacity. So we're training 2 organizations, mentoring 2 organizations, one from Anchorage, Alaska, and one from Logan County, West Virginia, in this model, in this philosophy, in this approach. And so, you know, people who treat you and people who lock you up both said we're the best, and that is very rare, right? No, we do know what we're doing. There's no question we know what we're doing, and I think what we know what we're doing, you know, maybe better than anyone in the nation is we know that number one, we don't know everything, and we need to continue to learn, and we need to continue to figure out what else can be done. And we also know that the traditional way of thinking of this, that Frank has to hit bottom, have enough pain in his life to experience enough consequences and then go find recovery, you know, his family should sort of stay out of it, you know, it's Frank's business. We know that that's fundamentally flawed. And we've been willing to try to figure out a new way to do it, and the nation has jumped on that. It's just that we have a lot of work to do, guys. We have a heck of a lot of work to do to really get this thing where we need to get it to be. Honestly, these conversations need to become commonplace everywhere. It needs to be part of schools, it needs to be part of churches, it needs to be part of workplace. If we're able to move to a place as a country where this is okay to talk about as a healthcare issue, what you'll find is a lot of these issues will start to get headed off. But the way we approach things now is what? Don't say anything, don't let the neighbors know, don't let anyone know, and until you have to. And unfortunately, a lot of times that's too late. So, all right. Well, thank you for that shout out. I did not plant her in the audience. Fantastic. All right, so we're going to go through some things and talk about what are the basics around substance use disorder and how do we know the difference between somebody's partying, kind of going at it hard, maybe doing some risky things versus somebody who's crossed the line. And for a lot of you folks, we've heard this before, but we'll go through it relatively quickly, make sure we get to some other things tonight. So the first thing we have to do is acknowledge that a lot of people, this is who I am professionally, guys. Done a lot of different work in a lot of different places, community mental health, run several different rehabs, a lot of different programs on the drug and alcohol, outpatient level as well. And I've been at FAVOR Greenville for 6 years. And FAVOR Greenville has a little bit of a different approach. Rather than clinical services paid for by insurance or paid for by the individuals, what we wanted to do was create a program that could be completely free. And that's good for a lot of different reasons. One is that's a good price, right? Everybody can afford that. But then the second reason is it gets rid of all the red tape. And when you're dealing with substance use, and for that matter, mental health, the last thing you need is red tape. you're highly upset, you're highly emotional, you're very, very anxious, you're worried, you're wondering what's going on. There's usually a whole lot of drama involved, am I right? You know, it's not a calm situation. And so the idea that you got to go through pre-approval from an insurance company to see somebody, or that you're going to call and get an appointment 2 weeks down the road, I get it that that's how they got to do clinical services. I ran clinical services. But that's where we came in. We said, let's do something different. So I hope you get the idea. We call it coaching rather than therapy. That's also very, very intentional on our part, guys. That's not because we think that what we're doing is any less important than therapy. But what we also know is that the therapy has a tone to it, right? Like, what's wrong with you? Let's figure it out. Let's diagnose you. Let's get that treatment plan together. That's not what we want to do. We want to consult with you, talk about what's going on right now. The house is on fire. How can we help you put it out? It's very practical. It's very solution focused, in the moment kind of stuff. We do a lot of our coaching over the phone. We do a lot of our coaching via text messages. The idea that Frank's going to come in and sit down in a chair and talk to me about his week, and I'm going to say something magical to him that sends him out the door, and he's good to go. Do you guys see the flawed logic in that? We believe in the moment type stuff is more important. It would be more important if I text Frank right before he's going to drink than it would be to talk about how he wanted to drink a week ago. So that's the general idea. Make sense? And when we talk about substances, we want to talk about it in that same spirit, in a very, very practical level. So we don't even talk about substances alone, or at least I don't when I'm talking to families. It's this idea of substance use and mental health. And the reason why we do this is it's very, very common when you first start dealing with this to not know what's going down. Is this depression? Is this bipolar disorder? Is this trauma? Or is this addiction, right? So the two go together. It's, in my opinion, it's very, very difficult to separate these worlds. Now, we are definitely experts on the recovery side. Does that make sense? We know our way around addiction treatment services and recovery services, but we want to acknowledge that most of the folks who come to us, at least on paper, have some type of co-occurring disorder. About 60 to 70%. And it's mostly anxiety and depression. And I don't know if you're aware of some of the trends in our country, but anxiety is at a record high level across all age demographics. People can't really figure out what's going on with that. Like, what's the deal? Why are so many people anxious? Especially younger people. College-age students, record-setting levels, about 20% plus report a diagnosable kind of anxiety issue. And that was never the case. It was under 10%. As recently as like 2008. So something's going on. We're living in a world that's more anxious. That plays itself into substance use through all kinds of different ways, but one of the most common is this thing called self-medicating. Has anybody heard the term self-medicating? So this is definitely part of the dynamic that we talk about. Whenever you look at like substances, and there's chairs in here if you want to come on in. There's a chair right here. It's okay. We're very, very, very informal and accommodating bunch here. And so if you want to think about, I was depressed, I was anxious, I couldn't relax, I was socially phobic, I would go out and I would get scared. All of a sudden, can you see how drinking would take on a different tone and maybe have more of a payoff? Or what if I went through a trauma when I was a kid and I couldn't sleep at night and I had night terrors? Can you see how, using a sedative before I went to bed or popping some pills would work? There's a part of this that we have to acknowledge, that there are dynamics at play here that go beyond just addiction. And we look at that as a co-occurring disorder, and so we want to be responsible about that when we talk about it. Again, the most common, depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, and then the other area is trauma. Depending on who you talk to, you'll find some people who would just straight up say that any of us who are addicted, we suffered some type of trauma. Even if it wasn't like a big trauma like physical abuse or sexual abuse or severe neglect, it could be divorce in our family at an early age. The theory is that addiction is used, that the substance is used to cope with the trauma. So I'm not telling you what you need to think about this. I think that it's uncharted territory right now. Nobody knows for sure, but these areas all contribute and they all need to be discussed. And you need to be thinking about this as you start to kind of figure out, where do we get help for my loved one? How do we help push them along? It's interesting I'm on the record with this in multiple venues, not just FAVOR Greenville. I believe that family members, especially depending on how young the person is, the younger, the more significant this is. Family members have to become experts at this themselves because the system does not have the right support for you. You don't have people to call. If you Google help with addiction, you will get 20 pages of rehabs. And when you call them for information and advice, it's not going to be information and advice. It's going to be, here's what's going on, so-and-so is going to die if you don't do anything, let's get them on a plane and get them to the rehab, right? That's just the way it is. I don't care what anyone says. If I take my car to the used car lot and say it's making a strange noise, they're not going to talk to me about getting it fixed. They're going to talk about how can I get you another car. It is the reality of life. And if you do that, what you're going to find, if you Google for information, you're going to find about 20 pages of rehab ads. And so where do you get straightforward, objective information? From places like FAVOR Greenville, but even more, you have to become educated yourself. You get that idea? Not that you have to solve the problem for your loved one. I'm not suggesting that. I'm not suggesting you go rescue anybody. I am suggesting, however, whatever decisions you're making, you become almost like an expert. You don't rely on me to tell you what to do, because this is going to go on. This is the nature of it. It's 1 step forward, 2 steps back. It's 5 steps forward, 1 step back, right? It's a chronic situation, so the more you know, the better. We were talking about this today. What families want from people like me is what? And I get this. You want me to fix your loved one. And that's the idea of where rehab comes in, because send them to us. We will dip them in the super secret waters of recovery and send them back to you fixed. What I'm telling you is that that's not how this works. This is an ongoing process that you have to continue to learn about. And the more you know, the better. Now, the last thing I want to say about this whole idea of substance use, the third theory or the third idea, and I don't really have it up here, but the third thing to consider, so you got some people have anxiety, depression, they're more vulnerable. Some people have trauma, more vulnerable. There's also a theory or an idea that some people are born with less dopamine receptors, or you have early stress and trauma in your life that reduces the amount of dopamine receptors in your brain. I'm going to show you how that works. And what that means, dopamine is the neurotransmitter that allows us to experience pleasure and contentment. And so if you can't experience pleasure and contentment naturally, what are you drawn toward? Some kind of chemical solution. Can you see that part? Those are sort of the 3 buckets where they talk about people being more vulnerable. But make no mistake, even if you have, but I wonder about this statement I'm about to make. Is anybody actually normal? I mean, I really challenge the idea that there's like a normal person. I challenge that, man. We can meet afterward.
Normal is sitting on your drive.
And so this idea of, because what I was about to say is that anybody, even if they don't have any problems or completely normal, if you put enough effort into it, you can become addicted to something, right? So anybody can become addicted by exposure. What I'm suggesting is we all kind of bring something to the table that makes us vulnerable in our own way. Is that fair enough? And you probably know your loved one, what they deal with and what their background is and what might be their vulnerability. So here's the way you think about it. Think about this as a normal experience. This is life, going through life, experiencing it, having good days, having bad days, but you can feel contentment, you can feel okay. You're just doing life. You're not really looking for anything different. Okay? That's a normal person. That is not me. So I believe that I was born with less dopamine in my brain. I believe it. I'll find out when I go to heaven. That's the first thing I want to ask God, like, was I right about that? I believe I was born with less. I also believe I had early childhood experiences. In my case, it was domestic violence situations in my home. It was a war zone, man, and I've talked about that before. My father was a binge drinker. If you know anything about binge drinkers, great periods of time with everything being cool, and then all of a sudden it pops off. And that's really a crazy way to grow up. So I believe that also suppressed my dopamine. And so I believe I'm walking around at an 8. I'm not normal. But I don't know I'm not normal. Do you get that part? Because you're just doing life. And early on, that's the kid who can't sit still. That's the kid who's always like, what's next? Give me another piece of candy. Let me jump off that roof into the pool. Let me drive the motorcycle into the wall. You know, it's like, give me something, do something. And for me, it was sports. Sports were my savior in that situation. I threw myself into, I was a pretty good athlete, and I escaped through that process. But I didn't play sports normally. And people would look back on it and probably say, that's just because you wanted to be really, really good. Not really. It was an escape. It was a coping mechanism. I wanted to be at the gym all day in order to deal with that. But then around age 14, I found alcohol, and I not only did I get myself to a 10, I got myself to a 16. You flood your brain with dopamine when you put a chemical into it, okay? And not only do you feel okay, you feel great. The problem is, if you do that enough times, we got chairs up here, guys. If you do this enough times, your brain will overcompensate. It's not safe to flood your brain with dopamine over and over and over again. And it'll turn off the production. It'll turn it back. See how this is a 6? It went from an 8 to a 6. Now what's going on is your brain is starting to back it off. And so on and so forth. But you keep using, you get to a 12, and then very quickly you get to this point where you can't even get the effect you want. This is called tolerance. It's also called the cascade. It has a bunch of different names. But you see what's happening here? This is different than a party. This is where you're using compulsively. And nobody can tell you, yes.
Is that when they switch to a different drug?
It could be when they switch to a different drug. It could also be when they use more. It could also be like not that evident. It could just be more of an internal experience for the person. You know what I mean? You may or may not even notice this. But this is a different experience than I'm having a little bit of fun. You guys get that? And this is what it looks like. So this is what your brain should be looking like when it's firing in all cylinders and you have dopamine coming. You're like, this is fun. I'm having a great time out here fishing. I'm having a great time out here, you know, at the birthday party, that kind of stuff. And this is what it's like whenever you cross that line. You have no dopamine. You just can't. You're not feeling it. And in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, they call that irritable, restless, and discontent. Nothing is okay. It's not depression. Okay, it's not depression. This is not a serotonin issue. It is discontent. Have you ever been discontent? Yes, you have. I'm sure you have. But it's there all day, every day. And the only thing you can think of is go get a hold of this stuff, because that's what made you feel better last time. And this is addiction, guys. This is addiction. This is substance use disorder severe. This is I don't know if anyone can help those folks and get them a chair or help point them in the right direction. Do you guys get that?
Yep.
And the question is, how do you know whether a person has gotten there? You don't know whether a person has gotten there. That's part of the... Let me take that back. You probably are sure depending on certain drugs, right? There are certain drugs that if a person is using, there really is no such thing as recreational heroin use. There really isn't. There really isn't any such thing as recreational crack cocaine use. There just isn't. Okay? But there are a lot of other substances that are socially acceptable. And those substances, that list seems to be growing. It was alcohol for a long time only. Now it's alcohol and marijuana. There's a legalization of marijuana. But do you get my point with this? You can probably make a judgment if it's some of the more hard stuff. But for the most part, this is an internal decision for the person. Very much it's going on inside of me. You're not seeing it. But you'll know certain things that you can tell. People who are dealing with this, they will start to fail at work, at school. They'll start to use despite clear consequences. They'll continue to use despite the fact that they're literally killing themselves slowly but surely. Maybe they overdose and they continue to use. They'll continue to use despite interpersonal problems. People are mad at them. People are saying, don't do this. You continue to use. You use in situations over and over and over again where you could get physically harmed. You get the idea? The judgment is gone once you hit there. And it can happen with any substance, okay? Certain substances will get you there sooner than others, but it can happen with any substance. And this is what was called addiction for a long, long time. It's not technically called addiction. It's called substance use disorder severe. And whatever the substance is, you put it at the front. This happened to me probably when I was in my mid-20s, but nobody said a word to me until I was 29 or 30 years old. This is people just didn't talk about it then. Not that they talk about it a lot now, but back then you just didn't say anything. And so I walked around like this, you know, for a good 5-8 years of my life. this is a miserable state to be in. You're never okay. You get that? Like, even when you get a hold of the substance, you're still not okay, because as soon as you get a hold of it, you're figuring out when you're going to run out. And in my case, it was pain pills. And so I lived my life on this perpetual process of counting pills and doing creative math in my head. Okay, I got 2 pills, I got to make it 12 days. You know, oh my, I'll eat 1/4 of 1/4, 1/16 of 1/18, and then, you know, it's like, I'll take this on the full moon, and if that happens, it'll magically multiply, and I'll be good to go, right? It's just kind of like, oh, by the way, if you ever want to do an experiment, you want to know if somebody's getting pain pills from the CVS or anything, we're the people ripping the bag open before we get out of the store. You don't do that for amoxicillin, right? So, you know, so it's kind of, and this is this was, and then now couple this with, depending on the substance, add to this also physical dependency, right? So with opioids, for example, and alcohol and benzodiazepines, you will also be getting sick if you don't have the substance, physically sick.
Yes.
And then the third leg of the stool is what's called the psychological part of the process, or triggers or cravings. The idea that I'm doing good, but then I run into a friend that reminds me of using, and then that triggers this psychological. All that adds up to, this is not as easy as just quit. All of that, you guys get this? The purpose of this is not to make an excuse for anybody. This isn't to say that anything that your loved one's doing is okay, give them a break. This is for you, when you go home tonight, to know that, like, I'm not talking to somebody who's coming from a sane point of view if I believe this has happened. This is totally irrational behavior. Somebody had their hand up. Frank.
I was just gonna say, it gets to a point where you know it's really not working anymore, but you're still going up. Your brain just thinks it will.
So you know it's not working, especially if you've been exposed to information about it. What's interesting is a lot of times people are so early on in the process that they don't even know this, right? If you went to rehab, or you went to meetings, or you got exposed to a therapist, you probably know that. And in your mind, you're probably like, okay, this is what, maybe that's where it's at, but you still can't stop, guys. It's very hard to explain. It is literally tunnel vision. It's automatic. It's not a decision-making process. Nobody's getting up in the morning and getting out a pad and paper and like, pros, cons. Pros of using, cons of using, right? It's 100% let me go get it, let me go get it. Now the deal with this is, again, to emphasize one last time, this isn't to make an excuse for anyone's behavior, because the truth is people need to be held accountable to deal with this, because a talking solution is not going to work. The only thing that's going to work is our boundaries and changes in family behavior. You get that part? You can't reason with a person and get them to stop. Who had their hand up? Yes?
Question. Is there a clinical way to administer dopamine and raise that to a level that it should be at?
That's a great question. Yeah, it's called Oxycontin. Yeah.
Is there a legal way?
Yeah, no, there isn't. The legal stuff is all the stuff that gets you there. It's a fantastic question, because the most natural part of this is, let's just get something that puts dopamine in there. But remember, anything that puts dopamine in there is the stuff that got you here. Now there are certain substances, there are certain supplements and certain drugs that act on a different mechanism that have been theorized to raise dopamine slowly but surely, kind of in a way that Prozac or something would raise serotonin, but it hasn't really been proven yet, and it doesn't happen quick. It doesn't happen fast. It's a fantastic question, and I always say that when somebody asks, because it's a logical thing to say.
Why isn't the medical industry working on a solution there?
Because think about it, the neurotransmitter dopamine would be what you would have to put in there, and the neurotransmitter dopamine sets off the addictive process again. It's a double-edged sword. It's like, yeah, I can give you something that's going to make you feel better, but I'm also going to be continuing that cycle. Now the question would be, could somebody do something at the beginning over here, right? That may be where there's down the road, if there's genetic testing or anything that they could do to identify Rich whenever he was 8 or 10. This has been criticized because people say that's ADHD and we're doing something when we put kids on ADHD meds, but that's criticized widely because that doesn't seem to be the most responsible way to go about addressing that issue. You could theoretically do something on the front end. Here's the other thing I want to say, like, once you cross that line into your brain being this way, there's a phenomenon in mental health and in addiction. It's called the kindling effect. And the kindling effect goes like this: that once it happens to you, once you cross the line, or if it's bipolar disorder, once you have one episode, or if it's depression, once you have one episode, it makes it exceedingly easy to have a second episode. Do you guys get that? That's called the kindling effect. It builds on itself. So this is what happens here. This is why if I go a while without using and I pick up a substance, I'm gonna get back there quicker than I did at the beginning. It's not like, okay, Rich, it took you, let's just say for sake of argument, it took you 10 years to get there the first time, so, well, you know, why don't you just go ahead and pick up and take another 10 years, right? Well, that's not how it'll work. Because of the kindling effect, it'll happen much, much quicker.
So you need to use less, if you've been in recovery and they.
It'll take less time, it'll take less of the
and
substance.
use less of the drug. So what if you're dealing with someone who's incredibly disciplined? And,
Yeah.
my son's addiction is meth. So what if he's able to function, he's been clean, and then he just uses a little bit? Can you control that?
So, if
Sounds
you,
like you
so
can.
this, it's a great question. The question is, can you ever control this? You know, and even if you're disciplined and even if you have your act together, can you control it? The most honest answer is nobody can say, because we don't know what's going on here, right? And the majority, you guys are going to think this is a strange statement, but the majority of people who've used methamphetamine did not become addicted. Do you get that?
Yeah.
Like, so it's not like every single person who uses heroin becomes addicted, or every single person who uses methamphetamine. About 25% of people who use heroin will become addicted. That means what? 75% don't. So the truth is, 25% is an incredibly high number, though, guys. Just understand that.
Yeah.
That's incredibly high. Like alcohol is around 10, marijuana is around 9. Get in touch with that's about 3 times more. So it's very, very addictive. I'm not saying it's not, but you don't know whether this happened. And so the treatment system in places like FAVOR and people like Rich, what do? We talk with the most conservative piece of advice. We treat everyone as if this has happened, okay? And the reason is, it's like any other medical procedure. If you go to your doctor tomorrow and there's a chance you might have cancer, what's he going to do? He is going to send you down the road to get the next test. He's not going to be, it's only a 1% chance. But we don't tell people in recovery that because, you know, well, I do. I'll be perfectly honest with you. What I say to anybody who's dealing with recovery, and there could be people in here who are in recovery themselves or looking for recovery, like, it isn't even about what you want to call it. It's about what's going down in your life today and how's that going for you, okay? You can call it whatever you want. You can call it addiction or you can call it a banana. Is it working for you? Are you living a life that you could see yourself continuing to live, and a life that you're satisfied with? Do you get that part? And then all the dynamics that come into that. How does the family play into that? Well, I'm living a life that I'm okay with, but my mom's not okay with it. Well, how important is your relationship with your mom? Do you see you see how to think about it? It's not about the actual substance, or are you addicted, or are you not addicted? The question then becomes, are the drugs more important than your mom? Or in my case, are the drugs more important than my wife? It wasn't about me coming to some realization and saying, like, I'm now going to change my behavior. It was literally like, you are no longer going to live here if you continue doing what you're doing. And again, you could have called it whatever you want. I say this all the time. I could have walked into any group, anywhere, and I'd have got recovery when I left, whenever that all went down. I was so desperate to hold on to my family. I was so internally motivated. Do you get that? I could have walked into a Hare Krishna group and I'd have been like, hell yeah, shave my head, let's do it. You know, I happened to walk into the right 12-step group. That is an extreme example on this side, but I believe you can get there in other ways too. Like, where are you at? What do you got going on? Okay, I can control it, Mom. It's no big deal. You know, it doesn't get out of hand. And then the questions start to become like, okay, well, what is it about your life that you like and you don't like, and how do drugs relate to that? And if people are honest with themselves, they start to dig into some information that they will get uncomfortable with. You know, I don't sleep at night. I can't remember the last time I had a good night's sleep. That's a common thing, right? Like, so I don't care how much you control methamphetamine, you are not going to sleep at night, right? relationships are going to start to fall apart. That's where I would recommend people go with it. If the person is quote unquote in denial, right? We've heard the term in denial, it's not a problem. Did you have your hand up a while ago?
I did, and just talking about the dopamine, I'm just curious, someone that gets on the Suboxone or Subutex or something like that still has opiates in it, can their dopamine start coming back?
Yeah, if it's prescribed at the right dose, absolutely. Okay, absolutely.
Even though it's an opiate?
Yeah, because it's going to be acting in a different manner. Now, if it's overprescribed or people are taking more than they're supposed to, it's just like if I broke my leg and I had to take an opioid, it's not going to do this to me. You guys know the difference between what's called instrumental use, I'm using the substance the way it's supposed to, and recreational use, right? So it's interesting, like pain pills have been vilified to a certain degree, but the truth was, in my case, it had nothing to do with pain pills. It had something to do with the fact that I misread the label, and when it said 1 every 4 hours, I thought it said 4 every 1 hour. It was, and so that's the problem. If you're taking medication for pain, serious pain, that it's prescribed for, that's not going to set this off either. Yes,
What
ma'am.
about this commercial that they say that you can get addicted to pain pills in 3 days?
It's incredibly misleading. The terminology should be you can become physically dependent in 3 to 5 days.
I
Okay.
just saw that today.
And so, it doesn't mean addicted in the sense that I was addicted running around stealing your pills.
Okay.
And certainly some people could go there, but it's not. There's a huge like scare factor around prescriptions right now that it's not doing anybody any favor.
She asked, what's the difference?
The difference between what?
Between physically
Dependent.
So physically dependent means if I don't have it, I'm going to get sick and I'm not going to feel well and I'm always going to be drawn to get a hold of it. Addiction involves all the other criteria. Interpersonal problems due to it, lack of, you don't showing up at work, you start stealing to support your habit. Like at 5 days, that's not what's going on. Now you're going to get there if you don't remedy it. And one of the things about that commercial is it's trying to get people to what? Be like, okay, 3 to 5 days, I'm good to go. You see what I'm saying? Like it's very much a scared straight approach. And in that case, maybe it would work. Because if there's somebody watching that commercial and they're like, whoa, okay, I need to get off of this.
6 days.
Yeah, let me make sure I'm not there. That's very, very helpful in that regard. Yes, Carol?
Just to get back to the dopamine thing, if you have depression and you put on an antidepressant, and it helps with that dual diagnosis you have of depression, how does that affect the dopamine?
So the question was, if you're depressed and you're put on an antidepressant, how does that affect the dopamine? First of all, in theory, it's 2 different neurotransmitters, serotonin versus dopamine, so it doesn't affect it at all. It won't touch that. It's not mood or mind altering. You won't get any kind of like pleasurable effect from that.
So you could have a history of depression from childhood, and it's really not the dopamine that's affected at all.
No, and actually we don't even know if it's serotonin. The interesting thing about all mental health and addiction issues, guys, is it's called intuitive medicine versus precision medicine. Precision medicine is, I know exactly what's wrong with you and I can tell you exactly how to fix it. So what would be an example of that? You got to get your appendix out. You start to have pain, you go to the emergency room, they do whatever they do to you, they take these tests, you're like, you got your appendix is burst, we're going to take it out, you'll be good to go. That's precision. Intuitive medicine is, we're not sure what the hell is going on with you. We don't even know whether it's depression or anxiety or addiction, but here's what we think you should do. Do you get that? The problem is, too many people that are doing intuitive medicine are talking to y'all like as if it's precision. Rehabs are notoriously guilty of that. Like if you come in and you do exactly what I tell you to do, you're going to get better. Okay, fine. That's like saying if my fever goes away, my fever goes away. All right? The process is we cannot tell for sure, so we are going to tell you what we think is going to work, and we're going to tell you the safest thing to do. Do you get that? That's what your loved ones are being told when they go places. Here's what we think is going to work, and this is the safest way to go about it. Put down the substances, stay off of everything, get your butt to some meetings, talk to a therapist. Do you get that? That's the safest approach. What I would encourage you to be aware of, though, is that even if that's not going on, people can still work on getting better. They can still work on getting better, even though I don't take all the antibiotics I'm supposed to, right? As instructed. It was probably okay that I took some of the antibiotics. You get where I'm coming from? We don't want this to be an all or nothing proposition.
Bad example.
What's that?
That's a bad example.
Because we all do that.
Why?
Because you need to take them in case it makes a comeback and it's.
Dude, I don't do what I'm supposed to do.
What's the definition
So
of
like,
that?
I'll be at my doctor's office and he'll be telling me I have hypertension, and before he's even done, I'll be like, I'm not doing anything about this. You know, I'm a non-compliant patient. But nobody is kicking me out of anything. You follow what I'm saying? And nobody's judging me for being a non-compliant patient. I'm a very, very non-compliant patient. If y'all aren't, I'm not sure whether I believe you or not, but I guess good for you. I will not follow doctor's recommendations on anything, okay? But I've never been labeled a bad person for it. It's interesting. Nobody's ever threatened to like kick me out of treatment for it. You follow? Like, the only thing people have ever said is, you know, go do it again. People have been incredibly nice to me when I've said I didn't take my hypertension medication. If I'm a drug addict, though, and I say I'm not going to meetings, I'm not going to go to meetings, I don't believe in those, what's going to happen to me? I'm going to be told that I'm obstinate and I'm obnoxious and I'm in denial, and my family's going to be told, don't talk to him until he hits bottom and is willing to go do something. Now, if we think it's a disease, we have a disconnect there. We have a huge disconnect that we have to be honest about, and we have to be talking through, and we have to be thinking through. Again, I'm not suggesting that we're saying everything's okay with what your loved one's doing, and I'm not suggesting that you take care of everything that he's doing. I'm just suggesting that we either think that this is a disorder or it isn't, and we walk through these situations accordingly. In your situation, on what you should do with your loved one, it's going to depend on a lot of different things. It's going to depend on the severity of their behavior. So if I can camp out here for a minute, I've been thinking a lot about this, because here's what I know for sure about addiction in doing these groups. It is not, statistically speaking, likely that your loved one is going to die from addiction. It is possible, but statistically speaking, that's not the most common outcome. The most common outcome, hands down, is that it is going to linger forever and wear you out. Do you get that? Hands down, if you look at like just the total number of people who become addicted and the total number of families who've dealt with it, the main and most likely outcome isn't that they're going to die. It's that you're going to die early. Stress-related disorders, mental health-related disorders, because we'll just wear you out. And so there's one thing about like, hey, I'm 5 years into this journey with Rich, or I'm 10 years into this journey. Then we start to get like a little bit difficult. I'm 15 years into this journey. He's still living in the basement. You guys follow me? I'm 30 years. This is highly problematic. And so you need to look at each individual situation and say, what do I need to do for my own self-preservation? And what do I need to do based on what we've gone through? You guys get that part of it? There's no one-size-fits-all answer for that. You would find a lot of people who would stand up here and say, kick him out. Kick him out today. Don't let him back in. You'll find some people that will say, you guys have heard me say this before, the notorious peanut butter jelly theory. Do not kick him out and don't give him anything, not even a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, right? Okay, give him a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Here's a rule. Always give him a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Even if you leave it in a bag on the stoop, you're allowed to give him a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. You have to take into consideration what you're dealing with. I'm going to talk a little bit more about options for families, but before I do that, let's stop here and see if you have any questions on what to consider as you start to make decisions on what you personally need to do. So what are some of the factors, guys? How long you've been dealing with it, right? How worn out are you? How do you know whether you're worn out or not?
You're not sleeping.
Not sleeping is a good... Obsessing about it, thinking about it all the time.
Codependent.
What do you mean by that, Karen?
I'm dependent. If she's doing good, then I'm doing good.
So literally, like, your mood is dependent on what she's up to. Yep.
Affects your job.
You think it's your job? Is that what you...
No,
it affects your job.
Affects your job.
Yep. Yep.
Heart palpitations and high blood pressure.
That would be a good indication. Do you hear that one? Heart palpitations and high blood pressure. Stroking out is definitely an indication you've been at this and it's wearing you out.
If they're just mean.
I'm not on the same page as my spouse.
If you're not on the same page, now that's a complication, absolutely. That's interesting. You could be in that dilemma though, right from the very jump, right? That's definitely a complication. One of the ways you know you're worn out is it's going to sound like you're worn out. You're literally like, I cannot do this anymore. If you start to think, I cannot do this anymore, and you think it once, and you think it twice, and you think it 25 times, you want to start actually listening to that voice. You want to start listening to that voice. Like, I can't do this anymore becomes, okay, what am I going to do about it? You get what I'm saying? Like, it's one thing, you can ignore that to a certain extent, but then you'd be like, what can I do about this? I'm just worn out, I can't do this anymore. But understand, human beings are pretty good at sucking it up and going through life, even when they can't do it anymore.
I think as moms, I said, I'm done. And I said that probably half a dozen times before I was done. And I went and filed eviction.
I'm done, I can't do this anymore, you're out, that's it, that's the last straw, right? All those statements, absolutely. I mean, it's hard to imagine the people in here haven't said those type of things, which might be different than actually feeling it. Do you think you could say that even though you might not really be feeling it? You probably could, right? Because you could say that out of frustration. Technically, you could say that on day one to a certain degree.
You feel it at the moment, but then
Yeah.
pass it.
I'm talking about in your bones worn out.
Yeah, mine was at the magistrate's office.
The event, the time. So people will talk about, here's when I knew it was going to be different. Or here's when I knew that I was going to be different about this. And so, the amount of time has something to do with it. The behavior of the person has something to do with it. What do I mean by that?
Are they mean?
If they're mean. Yeah. Yeah. So why would somebody who's addicted to drugs, trying to get their parents or their loved one or their spouse to take care of them and help support their habit, ever be mean?
Because it's our fault.
That's what they say. But think about it. There's nothing logical about that. If I'm trying to get you to do what I want you to do, I should be nice. But the problem is, they're mean. We're mean when you tell us no. Do you get where I'm coming from?
Yeah.
Like, I can tell you right now how to make it so your loved one is never mean to you again. For the most part, I mean, just give them enough money for drugs every day and a place to sleep, and a bag, and like whatever else it is, and they're not going to be mean to you then. Well, even then, what's interesting is sometimes it'll unscramble a little bit. So really, the pushback comes whenever we start to be told no. Whenever people start to say, "I can't do that anymore. I'm not giving you that money. No way. I'm not giving you that money."
Or you
Okay.
wake them up.
Or you wake them up. Period. You mean like get up for work type stuff? Yeah. There will absolutely be a change, guys. Remember, if you looked at the picture of the brain we had up there, understand that there will be mood and personality changes that will occur where people will just be nasty. But I think you got to really seriously think about where you're at and what do you want to do with your relationships if the person is threatening in any kind of way, if you're on the phone with them or in their presence and they're just, you come out of there scared or you come out of there feeling a certain type of way where you don't even know, like, is that my son, is that my daughter, is that my husband, is that my wife? I literally have talked to people where they'll talk about being fearful around their loved one. That's a period of time where you got to cut it off. That is where the advice is you got to cut it off. Because now you're talking about what? Your self-preservation in a very, very direct way. You do not owe anything to the person in terms of taking care of them while they're actively using. Okay? You get that? There is no guilt if you don't. You're allowed to, and nobody judges you if you do, but you do not have to. Do you guys get that part? And there's a lot of information and research that would suggest that if you stay connected, it increases the likelihood of the person getting better. But staying connected is different than taking care of. Do you guys get that part? So the old idea would be for someone to say to Rich, get out, let me know when you want to go to rehab, come back and tell me what you want to do. But until then, I don't want to hear from you. that is not necessarily recommended unless, again, you're in danger or it's just totally out of control. There is, however, a middle ground that goes like, look, I'm not going to pay for the apartment. I'm not going to support your habit. I can't be part of that anymore. I'm not going to bail you out of jail if you get yourself in trouble. But I will, we can get together and have lunch and talk about the weather and talk about football. We don't have to be enemies. It doesn't have to be one or the other. You guys get that? This is what I'm trying to say. You do not. It doesn't have to be let me take care of all your issues, or I hate you, don't talk to me. It doesn't have to be that way. It can be where like I'm not going to take care of your business, but I still love you, and we can get together and we can talk. That's actually the recommended way to do it. Yes, ma'am.
I was just gonna say, it can be that way if internally you're tuned so that you can be that way.
Yeah,
But
it's hard not
sometimes
to
it's not.
get
So,
For a while.
so the comment was, it can be that way if you can handle it that way, right? If you can be tuned into yourself enough to be that way. So, we know what might get in the way of the person who's addicted falling into that, right? It might be that they're so caught up in that thinking that they can't get together and talk about anything other than give me money, give me money, give me money. What would get in the way from the family end, to your comment? What would make it impossible for the family to do that?
Your heart.
Your heart? What do you mean by that?
Well, you meet with them and you get this sense of, okay, maybe they're not, and maybe they're okay, and then
And you
something
want them to
steps and
be,
you go, no, they're
and you want them to be okay. So there's just the idea of the heartbreak involved, with watching your loved one go through something like this.
It's easier to text or whatever than it is to see.
So you can start to define maybe some boundaries and some ways that you can pull it off. Where the comment was, it's easier to text sometimes than to see something face to face.
Small children that can be harmed.
So if there's other kids involved, absolutely, there's dynamics where that will also make it very hard. And understand, like, nobody does this perfect, and I pass no judgment on anybody who's taking care of anybody or rescuing anybody. You get that? Like, I am on the record. I was on the record when I went through some stuff with my daughter 2 summers ago or whatever it was, or last summer, I think, where I said, like, I'm not kicking her out no matter what. Do you understand? Like, there's nothing that she can do that I will kick her out. That's just where I was. Do you follow me? That could change. That could change. When my son went to the University of Pittsburgh and decided he was going to pull his shenanigans, man, I kicked him out in a New York minute. Dropped him off at the bus station. He was like, I'm going to my girlfriend's house. I'm like, have at it, dude. Here's $8. It's 7 degrees out. Good luck. What was the difference? The difference literally had something to do with gender. I'm sorry. Call me, judge me if you will. That had something to do with it. And the second thing was, and this is maybe where I had an advantage, and this is what I mean by becoming a subject matter expert. I had an understanding of what my daughter was going through that made her much more vulnerable for bad things to happen than my son.
Yeah.
Okay? You guys get that part? And what was it? It's co-occurring kind of mental health stuff. Whereas this over here was just, hey, I'm going at it, I'm going to party. You get that? Let me just go at it. Let me just have a good time. So this understanding of what's going on will also influence. You guys understand? You get where I'm coming? It's easier to set boundaries with some people than it is others. Because there are some people where you're like, okay, that's fine. If that's where you're at, man, and you just want to party every day and go, like, I don't know what to tell you, have at it. Then there's other situations where you're like, but wait a minute, he's depressed or that's the part where I believe gets in the way for people, Carolyn. I think what happens is that there are certain scenarios you have in your mind or certain circumstances that make it really, really hard to pull the trigger on setting these boundaries.
Maybe if they were diagnosed before the...
If they were diagnosed, or you've had experiences with them where they've been threatened to suicide, or you've seen that side of this issue, it will make it very, very difficult. Whereas if you just had somebody who was like a frat boy out of control, you're like, yeah, get out. That's just reality, man. Mm-hmm. And so the deal is to, like, if you feel like you should be setting boundaries, let's get this takeaway. The takeaway would be, if you feel like you should be setting boundaries and you haven't been able to, the next question is what? Why haven't I been able to? What are the internal stories that I'm telling myself that's keeping me from doing what I know I should be doing? Do you guys get that part? And you're going to have to sit down and maybe talk to somebody or think that through. You could probably come up with it if you put 15 minutes to probably figure out the story that you're telling yourself about the scenario. And you guys know what I mean by the story. If I say no to this, here's what's going to happen. He's going to get angry. He's going to leave the house. He's going down the street to Joey's house. He's going to sleep on Joey's couch. Joey uses all the time. I know what happens over at Joey's house. You know, and that may be a legitimate reason not to say anything. But do you get the idea? Is talk to yourself about the real issues. Get to the root of what's going on so you know what you need to be working on. If you've decided it's time to go there. Carol?
With my daughter that was on heroin, I didn't kick her out, because she was vulnerable anyway, and small and a heart defect and all that. Until it got to where she was stealing from me and was impacting my well-being, that I had to say no more.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So you had a lot of reasons. I didn't know that about your daughter. She had a lot of reasons. I don't know if you guys could hear her, like physical issues, like heart issues, that kind of thing. So you have a lot of reasons not to go there. But
Right.
even you had a breaking point.
I had my breaking point.
Yes.
It's also really helpful for me, when you explained that to have those boundaries and to keep those boundaries was very important, but it was also okay to, as each circumstance presented itself, be able to change my boundaries, and that it was okay as circumstances and situations arose.
Absolutely. This is not like, written in stone. It can never change. We can never adjust. It's never like that. I've never really seen it like that, to be honest with you. You're allowed to adjust what you say. You're allowed to kind of like talk it over with people. Think of it a different way. The circumstances are liable to change. People are liable to change.
But isn't that the opposite of mean what you say?
No. Here's the deal with that. It's a great point, Carolyn. So the idea would be, so I always say, mean what you say what you mean, but don't say it mean. And that means that you're acting from a place of rationality. You know exactly what you want the boundary to be, and you're going to try to follow through after you're done. It doesn't mean that you're saying that I know I'm 100% right. Do you understand? So you're allowed to come back and say, let me think about this again. What you want to watch out is you don't change based on the emotions of the moment. You get so the difference would be you make a different boundary with your daughter based on the fact that you learned something at family group or you hear some different information, and you say, you know what, we're going to change it, and here's why we're going to change it. That's a healthy way to go about it. An unhealthy way to go about it would be what? She shows up at your door tonight crying, and you like and pulls at your heartstrings. Do you get the difference? So it's misleading when I say it that way, because it sounds like, here it is, never change. That's not what I mean. I mean, you are the one determining it. Do you get that? You are the one determining it.
And when you change, for me, when I changed a boundary, it was what was good for me too. Does that make sense? It was okay for me. I was gonna be okay no matter what the result was.
Which is technically what you want to do, right?
So taking care of me.
So Mary Kay's comment was, when she was doing that, she was doing this with this conscious idea of I'm taking care of me. That's really what you're doing. You're doing this. You're making this move to kind of honor your own feelings. And I'll give you an example. And this may have even been, you may have done this, Mary Kay. Mary Kay and I have known each other for like 73 years, right? So Mary Kay has been in family group literally from the beginning, pre-FAVOR family group. And it might have been you that made a decision to have your son at the house and go ahead and cook for him and stuff, which was sort of counter to the original idea. But the deal was that made her feel better for that period of time.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with that at all.
Yeah.
But you get the idea of doing something from a place of rationality versus doing something from a place of emotion and in the moment. And giving in is different than changing. Changing is a mindful process where and hopefully you have other people that you're talking to about it, and you say, like, you know what, no, we can do that different now.
And I learned from coming to FAVOR at that point in time in our lives, the things that I should be looking for him to have been changing as well. So we allowed him to come back home, and it was to be 24 hours, but we could see very slow and very little changes.
And I'm telling you, man,
little changes, but they were happening.
This is, and so I will be 100% serious. Mary Kay was a devoted attendee to the group. Do you follow what I'm saying? So she was becoming an expert in this. Do you guys get what was going on? She was hearing this every week. She was hearing what was going on. So when she found herself in that moment, she was able to make a judgment call similar to what I would be able to make with my kids. Do you see what I'm saying? And what I'm here to tell you is that you all can do that. You all can become such an expert at this, but it's not going to happen from coming to one group. So what the family wants is to talk to somebody like Rich or Hubert or one of the other staff, Carol, and we're going to tell you, here's the magic, equation, and then your loved one's going to be okay. What you don't want to hear is that if you keep coming to groups like this and keep learning, you will eventually have an intuitive response to this yourself, and you will get better at handling this regardless of what's going on with your loved one. That doesn't go over well with most families. There are some of you who are sitting there saying, I'm never coming back, this guy. Because that's not why you came here tonight. You came here tonight because you thought that there was an answer, and the answer, there is an answer, but it's a process. And then the other interesting thing is that as you change and you start to do that different, they change. And it's very hard, don't get me wrong, it's exceedingly difficult to accept that, because this is a very, very serious situation we're dealing with. I am not minimizing that at all. Somebody had a question over
Well,
here.
I was just gonna make a comment. My joke was at one point, well, when can I come home? And I said, when Hubert says you can.
When Hubert says you can. Wow, dude. I never had that kind of power.
But that was because I trusted.
I never
Right.
said she could come back.
Yeah,
Right.
he would never answer either one of us.
Right. That's good. That's actually a good job, dude.
Worked out well for all.
Well done, Hubert.
Motivational interview.
Yep.
Well, we know that trauma is, 75%?
Yeah, even more, some people think.
Is there a way, when you don't know, or if you're not sure if your child or cousin or whoever it is that had gone through some trauma, is there a way to figure that out?
Man, that's a fantastic question. Because I believe the other thing that holds families back are questions like that. Frank's comment was, what if you think there might be trauma? What if you think there's something there, and can you find out so that you at least know what you're dealing with? Because I do believe that happens. And I get that. I mean, a lot of times people will talk to me and say, I can't really shut the door because I know this happened to them.
Yeah.
And you can try to do things like, get them evaluated, get them to the right people, right? You can get them to a therapist. One of the other ways to handle that is if they are going to go to a therapist, make them sign a release of information. Like if you're working with the person, you're saying, maybe you can stay here if we see what's going on. But they have to work with you on that. They have to work with you on it. But it's legit. And it's okay to change and bring them back in and say, let's get this figured out. But be careful, right? Because you don't know what's going on, and it's not like they can give you an x-ray and say, here's the trauma, Frank. But it is definitely, and it's 100% one of those things that happens to families, without question. You hear it a lot. You hear it in group a lot, too, where, I know that that's not okay. He did steal the car, but I know he's dealt with this issue his whole life. And that's cool, man. But you still will be stuck. Do you see? And the person will still be stuck. So even if that's even if that's the case, there's still a reckoning moment. It's just going to feed into your decision making. Did someone else have a question back there? Yes, ma'am.
If you have an adult child that's living with you, and they say they're getting treatment, and you take them to places to get treatment, but they basically lock you out from getting information because they're an adult.
Yeah, it's a great question.
Right.
How do you know when to say enough's enough?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question.
Expect that they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Because so the comment was, what if you have an adult child? And really, just to let you know, this doesn't matter whether it's an adult child or not. This could be a child even under 18. They won't give you information without a release of information. So if you have a child who maybe you said some stuff to, like you got to go get help, and they've decided, yes, I'll go to treatment, but they're not letting you in. They're not signing a release of information. That you do need to start thinking, and I wouldn't encourage you to do it tonight or anything, but the conversation does start to become like, I need to know what's going on. Unless you see this incredible change in their behavior. The first thing I'll tell you is if somebody changes, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Just ride it, right? I'm assuming that you're still concerned, though. Yeah, so if you're still concerned, that means that there's still some stuff going on that you're not comfortable with. That's where you would want to, you can insist. It goes back to the boundaries. You go back and it would be a conversation like, listen, I'm not trying to tell you, and remember when you're doing this, you are the one who's rational, okay? So you want to make sure that you're not coming off like you're accusing anybody of anything. So you have to be calm when you approach it. And you say something like, this is just where I'm at with it. This is really, hey, maybe I'm wrong, but I really need to know what's going on. And can we talk about getting a release of information signed? Every single place that your loved one goes will not talk to you unless there's a release of information.
I'm very familiar.
I mean, and so you and the staff at the facility won't push it. You would have.
Some of them are actually quite nasty to you.
They'll get nasty if you ask. They'll get nasty, and so the deal would be, and now the other part of this would be ask yourself, why do you want to know, and what are you going to do if you find out?
Right. That's right.
Yeah, like that. You get like before you go in, ask yourself that. Why do I want to know, and what am I going to do if I find out?
Right.
Because I'm probably going to find out something I really don't want to know.
I think you set different boundaries based on what you know.
That's what I mean, though. You have to be prepared to do it, right? You have to play the tape the whole way through, for lack of a better term.
Replay it.
Yeah. Yes.
If the trauma can be found out and possibly treated, don't you have a much greater chance?
Yeah, all of that comes into play, absolutely. So, like, the question was, if a person has trauma, we talked about how that contributes. Absolutely, getting that treated at the same time is the ideal way. What it does for family members is it makes them feel better about. They know what's going down. They have an idea of what the deal is. And now I can make this decision or not make this decision. At least I have full disclosure and full information. Yes, ma'am.
The million-dollar question is, how do you make them think they need therapy?
Okay, so this comes down to boundaries. Okay? You cannot talk somebody, you typically will never be able to talk a person into agreeing to therapy. You typically won't. You can say things like, one of the recommendations I would have in this area would be, you don't approach it as trying to talk them into it. You ask questions like, what is it about it that you have concerns with it? Because then maybe you can dispel some myths. There are cases, guys, where sometimes people won't go to therapy because they just have this crazy idea of what's going to go on. I'm going to be laying on a couch talking to somebody and they're going to be asking me about my dreams. And you can clarify that, no, that's not what's happening. This is just a person who's going to be 100% on your side and try to help you feel better. Maybe that could work. Beyond that, I'm going to tell you, like, here's what's I have never seen anybody do that. I have never seen, including me, I've never been able to talk somebody in active addiction into anything. You guys get that? Yeah. I've never, hey Frank, have you ever thought that he was like, I'm going to quit drugs? Never. What I have done is teach families how to set boundaries and start conversations around what are we going to do different here. I'm concerned about you. I love you. Will you go get therapy? No, screw you. I'm not getting therapy. Okay, understand something. I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I started to attend this group. I got a little bit of information. I'm going to read a little bit more over this weekend. I'm not just going to sit here and watch you self-destruct. You see, like, you start to send the message that you're going to start to try to figure this out. Sometimes that gets the person to go. Sometimes that gets the person to go because in their mind, what are they doing? That used to get me to go. Do you want to know why that got me to go? Because I was very astute. I was a very astute drug addict. Highly intelligent, charismatic. My approach was charm you into giving me what I want. And when it came to therapy, if I saw the writing on the wall and people started talking about what would I do, I would go proactively and try to massage the situation. Do you get that? So sometimes you'll say it to somebody, especially if you say it in the right way, where you're like, I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I just know we have to do something. It would be easier if you went to therapy, but we're going to have to do something. You see what you're doing there? You're planting this seed that it's, you're literally, and I think you're being 100% honest when you say, I'm not sure what to do. I am not an expert at this, but I guess I'm going to need to become one. I'm going to go back there again. I'm going to read some stuff this weekend, and I'm going to I know so-and-so who's a therapist, I'm gonna call them. Like, sometimes people will go just to back that off. Does that make sense? They'll be like, okay, Mom, whatever, I'm going.
Well, knowledge is power.
Yes, yes, and we don't want, remember the brain that I showed. So the brain that I showed, by definition, it's hard for us to be talked into anything at that stage. It's very instinctual. We're kind of going on tunnel vision. So it's very hard for us to be talked into anything, but we can be kind of cajoled and sort of like boundaries and nudged toward it. Yes, ma'am.
So, do we tell him my husband and I came to the first class, this is my second class, he doesn't even know we're coming yet.
I would let him know.
Oh, yeah, that freaks me out.
Yeah, well, so, okay, so we're sitting.
Well, freaks him out in a different way, not in a bad way. No, no.
What if we're sitting down, what if we're standing, what if we're in this room,
Yeah.
what if we're, so, yeah.
So what I would say is that first of all, you know, I think everybody in the room can probably relate. I can personally relate to where you're at. So there's no perfect way to do it. We have to get in touch with that. You're not going to make or break the situation based on saying it right or saying it wrong. That's not. Don't put that type of pressure on yourself. That's not what's going on. The general principle would be to let, is it your son or daughter?
Son.
Let your son know that you love him and you care and you are learning about this and you just can't continue down this road. And I would literally say it almost like that, because he's going to say, what's that mean? What do you mean? And I don't know what that means yet. All I know is that I can't be part of this. And then look for that opening. And if he gives you that opening, what do you want? What's that mean? What do you want me to do? I would immediately say, well, one thing you could do would be you at least go talk to a therapist. Then you might get him to go, but he's not going because you talked him into it. He's going why? Because he thinks he can head you off at the past. You guys, but what do you care why the person goes, right?
They'll think
Do you
they
care?
have therapy
Do you
a couple
care? Like,
times.
here's another thing: people don't have to want therapy to get better from therapy. That's also a lie you've been told. Okay, nobody comes to drug and alcohol treatment willingly. Okay, we all are compelled there by some type of interaction. Some of them are much more obvious than others. You know what I mean? Like, I got a DUI, the court system sent me. Or, you know, I got fired at work, or I'm going to get fired. Like, don't get me wrong, there are some that are very, very blatant, but all of us come through some type of external motivation and or information. We read the writing on the wall and we go. So this idea of you got to want it to get better, that's not the case. You got to go and you got to be honest, and you eventually have to want it, right? Eventually something happens if you're going to actually get long-term benefit. But you guys, to get a person there is frequently like all kinds of stuff like this. It's such a great question, though, if we could like just stop here for a minute, because I feel like you've captured something that we've been misled on as a country, as a society, as a community. And it's this idea that the only way your son can get better, or your daughter, or your husband, or your wife, or whatever it may be, is by some type of realization that they need help, and then throwing themselves into that help. Because we've been told that. That's where the phrase like hit bottom. Hit bottom, have enough pain that you're going to go. Guys, there is zero truth to that. Yes, ma'am.
Then why do most of the therapists in all of the rehabs require them to call?
Well, that has nothing to do with philosophy. That's 100% an insurance issue. That's a medical issue. Like, you can't speak for your son to get him into a program. That's not their personal philosophy. That's a regulation. The question was, you know, why do they make the person get on the phone? There was a day and time when they didn't. You could literally, I mean, I remember doing interventions where I could call and say, I got a guy, Frank, and I can still do that some places, but it's very, very rare. And that's not because they believe that they got to, you know, want it. So that's more because they have no choice.
Right.
You got to talk to the person. Yes, ma'am.
But they're, like FAVOR, they're first steps that don't require all that. You know, and an AA meeting doesn't require all that.
No, there's NA meetings, AA
The
meetings.
first step doesn't have to be
Yeah.
to a therapist.
Yeah, there's other things that they can do. They could try to go. That's a great point. When you start thinking, this is really good. So even beyond like whether or not it should be therapy, you also are allowed to compromise on what you want them to do. So some people will say, I want to go see a therapist. I don't want to go see a therapist. I don't want to. Well, will you go to a FAVOR meeting and check that out? You know, or will you look for a coach perhaps, or will you go? One of the interesting things is sometimes people are willing to go see a mental health therapist over a drug and alcohol therapist. I would recommend whatever gets the ball rolling, you jump on it. Now, with the caveat of, if you've been through it 20 times, you get the difference? If you've been through it 20 times, you don't want to keep doing the same thing over and over again. You don't want your loved one to tell you over and over again, I'm going to see somebody, and you think they're not. You know what I mean? And here's the, I said this today in one of the interviews that we were doing, because the question came up of, what are the signs and symptoms? This was a question in this interview process that we were going through, common questions that come up. What are the signs and symptoms of drug use, of whether or not my son or daughter are using drugs? And I guess you could also apply this to other things, like whether or not they're going to therapy, whether or not they've relapsed. And I went through the book, the things that I'm supposed to say: changing friends, dropping grades, changing attitude, sometimes even changing what they're wearing. They start to avoid you, they start to isolate, all the things that go on. You know, but really the answer to this is that trust your gut. You are probably right. If you think they're getting high, they're probably getting high. And so step back and start asking yourself a different question, not are they getting high or not, like what am I going to do if I find out they are? How do I want to handle this moving forward? Where do I want to go with this? What is my particular circumstance? What's my pain point? What is my personal pain point? My personal pain point is, and this is you saying to yourself, my personal pain point is that they're living in the house and I am watching the self-destruction. Then that's what you want to take on. Maybe your personal pain point is not that. Maybe your personal pain point is, I really don't even know what's going on. We just need to get something going, so I want them to start some therapy. You got to figure out what your thing is. It's going to be different for everyone in here. And then you start to figure out, how do I attack that thing? You know, this is really, really important. And it's okay to think about it, guys. It's okay to not have this solution tonight. Now, I know, again, we're living in a period of time when it's dangerous and people are scared. I get that, but you are allowed to take a deep breath and start thinking this through. And you also are allowed to create a list of things you're not going to do. Okay, so you have the things, what am I going to do, and what are the things I'm not going to do? And so what do I mean by the things I'm not going to do? Okay, let's say that the pattern has been that you're just flipping out. You're just like, there's a lot of yelling and screaming going on, and there's a lot of like, you're doing this, I know you are. No, I'm not, screw you. Yeah. Has anybody here ever been told you need help? Have they ever told you that you need help? Have they ever told you that you're crazy? Right? So that you're allowed to check out of that drama tonight. You can literally say, I am not participating in that anymore. I'm not going to like accuse, I'm not going to like cajole, I'm not going to like argue, I'm not going to debate. I am going to simply become informed and let them know I'm getting informed, and let them know that there's a new sheriff in town, and eventually, don't say it that way because people get angry, but you know what I mean? Like, so they're like, it's wrong, but hey, I'm working on this. Something's different. Very interestingly, if you look at my story, so I had a pattern, I've shared it in here before, very well established pattern of living from chaos to chaos to chaos, problem to problem, running to my mom, begging my wife to let me back in, running to my mom, begging my wife. And then what was interesting was they start to change. They start to change, and it wasn't overnight, and they start to do things different. Both my wife and my mom, okay? And my wife in some very pronounced, interesting ways. She stopped asking me where I was and what I was doing. She stopped, confronting me. And I'm telling you that as true as me standing here, I noticed it so much more than I noticed the 750 fights. Do you get where I'm coming from? I noticed it, and I was like, I remember being like, well, something's not going down, man. She's like gonna kill me in my sleep, or there's an intervention being planned, or something's up, right? And here's what happens whenever that happens to a person psychologically. What you do is you break the pattern of thinking that we're in. So picture us going through life. We're in this process of we're always looking for the substance. We're looking for the party. We're looking for the substance. We're going on automatic pilot. We're getting mean. We're getting angry. We're manipulative. We're doing whatever we got to do to get through. And all of a sudden, you change your behavior. That gets in our head, and it changes the pattern. And that's where change comes from, guys. Change is an internal psychological process where we have to actually reflect on our behavior. And we would prefer to fight with you every day, every single day, than we would to ever have to reflect on our behavior. So you start to ask yourself, what can I do different? One of the ways is, like, is there anything that you could do where you could just start doing the opposite? So if you're an investigator or you're a private investigator, anybody know what I mean by that profile? The private investigator profile is kind of like, I'm going to follow them to the meeting to see if they went. I might even install a tracking device in the car. I am talking to the FBI about the possibility of a subcutaneous underneath the skin tracking device. Okay? So that's the, people are laughing. They're kind of like, he's kind of outrageous. Well, not really. And some people in the back are like, you can do that? And so it's like, so you know, if that's your thing, then you change that. And you back off and you try to bite your tongue. You try not to say anything. If your thing was maybe you weren't ignoring and you never became involved. One of the interesting dynamics, ask yourself this. If it's husband and wife, if the wife is always asking and the husband isn't, switch roles. Switch roles. Go home and say, your job is to find out what's happening. That's also changing the system. If you're a yeller, you stop yelling. If you're a confronter, you stop confronting. You know, again, with the caveat, if you're in danger or they're stealing your stuff or they're breaking your stuff or they're threatening to kill you, there's no room for that. You get that? Like, that's get out today. But I'm talking about if you have the room to work with that. You're starting to try to, like, let the person know, and this goes back to should we let them know, that's why I think you should, like, and you're not doing it in a threatening way, like, look, I always encourage people to say it like this. It's called recovery messaging, and it goes like this. You start with a place of love. You always say, we love you too much to just watch this continue. I don't even know what it's called. You can call it whatever you want. I'm not accusing you of being a drug addict. I'm not accusing you of being an alcoholic. I'm not saying you're a bad person. I love you too much to watch this continue, and we're trying to figure it out and learn about it. You know, I'm going over to FAVOR. I met with them tonight. I'm going to try to get some books. You know, I'm going to try to figure this thing out. I love you. I would do that if it was anything. And you just leave it at that. You don't follow it up with, and I know you're getting high. And I know that when you went over there last night, you were high when you came home. Even if you know, you leave it out. Even if they look at you and say, what are you talking about? I haven't used. And they're high right now while they're saying it. Do you get this? You do not go there. You walk away from it. You go do the rest of your night. Do you understand that that is the type of thing that will start to get people to start to think a little bit about this? So most people who are dealing with this issue are hurting units. Okay? A lot of us have kind of come into it over time. We don't know whether it's addiction or not. We're not trying to be in denial whenever we don't want to talk about it. We're not trying to be, whatever you want to call it, like obstinate or mean or anything. We're just sort of doing our thing, and we're falling into our patterns. And so hammering us is probably not going to work. You know, that people, I've talked to people on the phone, I've talked to family members who absolutely, they call me for an intervention, and while we're talking, I talk about the way we do interventions, and I talk about how it's invitational in nature, and we tell the family to let the people know that we're involved. And I sometimes get a sense from the family that they don't like that because they want a pound of flesh. And I get it. Why do they want a pound of flesh? Because the person has hurt you tremendously. I tell you this all the time. When I go visit my mom to this day, like I tell her I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'll probably call her tonight. I'm so freaking sorry for what I did to you. Because I had no idea. And you can believe that or not believe it, but guys, I had no idea. I literally did not. This is a horrible thing to say, but her situation or her part of this equation never entered my mind. The only thing I could think of is, where am I going to get this? Okay, she's not going to give me any money. I can't get anything here. What's next? Okay, I've been out for 3 days. She hasn't seen me. She doesn't know where I am. This is back in the era before cell phones, right? Back in the day, parents had no choice, but you just sort of like, you went out the door on a Friday and you're like, let me cross my fingers and pray. You know, there was not, my love for her, never changed. And if you'd have seen me, though, it would have been very hard for you to believe that. You get where I'm coming from? If you'd have seen the things I said to her, especially the things I said to her in the middle of one of these episodes where she busted me, right? You know, when I stole all the money, at one point in time, I stole a massive amount of money. It was this is how I adjusted it. It's my money. It's a bond. It kind of like, I got it at a discounted rate that she had locked up in her safe. And her point is like, how dare you do that, right? Which is a legit point. How dare you break into my stuff? And I was so indignant and over the top and insulting to her in that situation. I remember to this day the things that I said, and the way that I made her feel, and the way that I intimidated her and I belittled her. But it wasn't because I didn't love her. It was because I was out of my freaking mind, man. At that point in time, I was 100% addicted to opioids. And so I was running scared. And you know, so again, that's not about sympathy for the person. That's about awareness for you. And this sounds really, really crass. The best thing you could do is step back from this situation and approach it like it was a business plan or a strategy. And say, who are the people I need to get involved? Who are the players in this? Who's on my team? Okay? Who's on his team? Who can I get from his team over to my team? Whatever it might be. Is the best strategy for me right now to not talk to anybody for a month? That may be the case. So, interestingly, one of the most stressful situations that a person can run into is dealing with a circumstance where they feel like they have no control over it. Okay? So being in a situation where you think you're going to get laid off would be an example for that. So you're just waiting for the other shoe to drop, and you know you're going to have financial, and you're just stressed out and you're losing your mind. This has been studied a lot, guys. The moment you take action to deal with that situation, your stress level goes down. So the action you take, it depends on your individual situation. The action you could take could literally be like, you know, what are the steps I'm going to take? What is the one thing I'm going to change in the way I'm talking to the person? Or is there any boundary that I need to? Or maybe you sit down and you kind of like write it out. I don't know what that looks like. Or maybe you get somebody to talk to. But as soon as you start to take action on this situation, you will start to feel better. The action could literally be, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I love Rich's group, but he's not like warm and fuzzy enough. He's not really talking to us about yoga. And hey, listen, did you guys get did y'all get the newsletter we sent out? Did you see that we're making soap? What the hell is going on at FAVOR Greenville? So listen, if you haven't gotten it, you got to see it. It literally says like soap baking days at FAVOR, and I'm like, and I'm with these guys today when I get this, and I look at this newsletter. I'm sorry, I'm totally off track right now. So I look at this newsletter, and I'm like, we're making soap. It's like candy apple flavored soap. It's like cotton candy flavored soap, et cetera, et cetera. And the person said, well, at least they'll be clean. That was one of the best meetings ever, right?
Slime.
Yep. Yes, ma'am.
Just a quick thought, because my nature is to go into action, period. It doesn't, not even having anything to do with this, that's just, but my son-in-law one day, when we were talking about something that had to do with this, he said, have you ever considered that, we were talking about alternatives, have you ever considered the alternative of doing nothing right now?
Yeah.
And I thought, but it was an eye-opening, because what I have to remember is I'm not controlling her.
That's
I'm
right.
not sometimes even influencing her. And I need to stop convincing myself that my actions do somehow. So, because sometimes
Well,
they're not, you know, this is a grown person.
inaction is action. So inaction equals
Is it
action.
action?
Because again, it goes back to, especially because you talked it through, and you're making it from like a more rational point of view. All right, so it's 8 o'clock, and we're going to wrap this thing up. So we're going to be back here again next week, and probably a similar format. I always use this for boundaries because this is Aiden, my 6-year-old, and this is how he looks when you tell him no. Because there's this kind of common phrase where it's impossible to set a boundary without making somebody angry. Okay, it is an absolute 100% physical impossibility to set a boundary with another human being where they're going to be okay with it. They may not look like Aiden when you tell him he can no longer get on the iPad. Okay? They may, handle it differently, but do you get where I'm coming from? Don't expect them to be happy with the fact that you're gonna say no. But you're on the right track. You're on the right track. And what we'll do next week, I am back here next week, so next week we'll follow up. Maybe we'll talk a little bit more about boundaries and where to go with this and different ways to handle it. You guys bring questions. Let me know if there are topics that we need to talk about. We cover a lot. We cover a lot of different ground in a lot of different areas, but I never know if there's anything that you're dealing with that you want to know more about. And we can certainly do that, okay, if there's any given situation. And with your loved one, if you have anything going on, or they're, or if they're willing to, we do have a 24-hour call line, okay? We're changing the name of this. It's a little bit misleading. This isn't meant to be a crisis line. It says Operation Rescue. It's a little bit misleading. It's meant to be like an advice/support line. And what we're noticing is mostly it's families calling with questions like, here's what happened, and you got any suggestions? And so this is available, and certainly your loved one's allowed to use this, and also allowed to get this going. Encourage them to come to a meeting. We have meetings every day at noon. If they've been other places, tell them to come check us out. We got a different vibe, a different way of going about it. Our take is that you can get better from this many different ways. There's not one way to do this, and we don't really care how you get it done or what your preferred method is. Just keep coming back and keep seeing us. We celebrate your recovery no matter what it is, and you're in recovery if you say you're in recovery. Okay? It isn't about me defining anybody's recovery. You get that? It's your life, and you got to figure out what you want to do with it. So check us out and encourage your loved one to check us out. Is it all right if we close this thing with the Serenity Prayer, please? And we get a moment of silence for those still suffering with this disease, for the loved ones brought into this no choice of their own, followed by the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Make sure you make it to our lime cinnamon toast crunch soap making event. It's sure to be a game changer.
I want